Welcome back, Reg audience. We are live today, and we've got a humdinger for you. We're looking at the benchmarks for high-performing teams in 2021. Now, how do you increase your productivity? You might be thinking, I increase my productivity by watching fewer Regcasts. Well, that's not true, actually. The 45 minutes you're going to invest in this is going to be extremely useful and quite eye-opening, and maybe challenge some of the things that, well, a lot of people believe to be true, but maybe aren't really true. Who is going to be helping me with this today? Well, we have a cast of thousands, cast of four anyway, including me. But we have people from every walk of life. And we'll start with Ron Powell from CircleCI. Ron, welcome.
Hi, I'm Ron Powell. I'm the Technical Content Marketing Manager at CircleCI. I'm also the author of the 2021 State of Software Delivery Report.
Yeah, and Ron, this is going to be what's in that report is really very much the basis of what we're going to talk about today, isn't it?
Absolutely. Like this year's report, one of the big things that we offered was a set of baselines for the 4 metrics that we think are most important for developer teams to track as far as measuring velocity and engineering efficiency on their teams.
Yeah, don't tell everyone too much about it, or else they'll think, oh, I've heard enough, I'm going to log off. We've got to keep some secrets for later. And James from Redmonk. James, welcome.
Hi, yeah, thanks. James Governor from Redmonk. So we're a research firm. We spend our time really trying to understand developers and the decisions they're making from an engineering perspective. Obviously, historically, everything in IT was about purchasing. These days, with the cloud, with open source, with social coding, we're in a world where developers and the decisions they make is more important. That's what we try and understand, and that's what I do on a daily basis.
Yeah, that's it. Most research firms, most analysts like yourself, they're not really focused on what developers do, aren't they? Are they missing something?
Well, I think so. Both are relevant. There's no doubt that sort of top-down effects in decision making are always going to be a part of the mix. I think what has changed is the big significance now. We see a lot of organizations just spending more time listening to their developers and frankly making decisions. If you're in a world where you're competing for talent, which a lot of orgs are, then they have to be using the sorts of technologies that developers want to use, because the developers as I say, in a talent constrained environment have choices about where they can work. So yeah, I think the game has changed quite a lot, and we just try and understand what developers are doing, why they're doing it, what makes them tick, and the platforms they're choosing.
Good. So what we really need is someone from the development side of the house, and we have him today. Sergey, welcome.
Hi, pleasure to be here. My name is Sergey Tupchi, and I'm software engineer in product services group at Contentful. Contentful itself providing services in a content infrastructure field, and our team in which I'm involved is specifically focused on the Contentful engineers and providing tools and techniques, processes to enable internal engineers be more productive and ship changes faster and efficiently with the quality in mind.
Good. So your job today, Sergey, is to make sure that the other two guys don't say anything that isn't really true. So
I'll keep watching.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, keep watching. And for the rest of you, your job today is, because we are live, your job today is, if you want to ask questions or add a comment or tell us something about your experience, if it's relevant to this, well, you can do it. Just type it into the box, it pops up. Put your name in as well. It's nicer, and we can give you a shout out. If that's something you want to do, you're very welcome to do it. We're pleased to have you along. So let's have a look at what we're going to be talking about today. Well, the heart of this is talking about the metrics for DevOps productivity, what you measure when you want to measure productivity. Not as simple as you think, but actually it can be done. And so, of course, coming from that, how do you increase your productivity? No one wants to decrease their productivity. How do you increase it in 2021, especially considering some of the particular challenges of working at the moment? And that means what are meaningful goals to set engineering teams, and what are the metrics that maybe it's easy to measure or we're used to measuring but really don't mean very much. So let's start off with you, Ron. looking at the metrics that are important for measuring DevOps productivity. And if we can start off with really, what are the metrics that people are accustomed to measuring, and are those important? We should talk about that as well, shouldn't we?
Sure. Yeah. Let's give a little bit of like why CircleCI is uniquely positioned to have a conversation about this. Well, CircleCI is a continuous integration platform. We were founded in 2011. We have about 400 global employees, and we power some of the world's biggest and best engineering teams. What that does is it gives us a front row seat into how teams actually move code from idea to delivery. And so through that, that gives us the opportunity to then share out what we observe on our platform. And that opportunity then gives us the opportunity, that process gives us the opportunity to then compare our results to some of the larger industry reports that also cover some of these same topics. Some of these reports, like the DORA report or the Puppet report, these reports also cover what will look similar to the 4 metrics that we're going to talk about today. And I'll go through and describe these in greater detail when we get to that. But the big difference that differentiates the report that we create each year now and the reports that have been historically measuring these 4 same metrics, the big difference here is that the industry reports that are larger are all based on survey data. And so that survey data then is then biased by the memory of the engineers that choose to participate. There's also the selection of engineers that choose to participate. And then there's the willingness to, or there's in order to keep the survey accurate, you have to ask very specific questions. And so it doesn't necessarily cover generalized behavior, whereas we can measure all of the behavior on our platform. And so I think that we get a little bit of a deeper understanding of the way that actual engineering work gets pushed through our pipeline.
Ron, can I
yeah,
ask you on
sure.
when you get survey information, does it bias in one direction? Does it, if it distorts the picture, does it distort it to make people seem more productive, more successful?
Oh, it always distorts to make people seem more productive, more successful. But that's not in large part just the bias of the people that are responding. Again, to make these reports accurate, because they are survey data, you have to really drill down into a question. And so those questions are often about the performance on your main application or the primary branch of your main application. And so behavior on in those particular scenarios often might look different than what it would look like if you were to generalize all behavior across an engineering team.
Mm-hmm. And so your approach is more of a sort of wisdom of crowds type approach.
The wisdom of crowds approach, I think, is a very good approach here. We have over 40,000 organizations that build on CircleCI. This is gives us data points that are far more vast than the amount of information that you could get from the survey results. The biggest and best survey results have 10,000 people that respond, whereas we're able to look at data sets that include tens of millions of data points. And so the ability to average over that type of behavior or over that volume of behavior on our platform does give us the capacity to try to pull insight out of that, especially because with a volume that is that high, the 50th percentile behavior on the platform is going to probably be very indicative of what a generic or maybe like an ideal engineering team might be able to approach the stats that those teams get.
James, Ron's been talking a little bit about how we're measuring there. You see all these reports. Is there also a question about what we're measuring?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think one of the things that the industry has sort of frankly fetishized a bit, gets very excited about, is like sort of Netflix, hundreds, if not thousands of production deploys per day. So, we've really over-rotated on this idea that, being successful as a software delivery organization is just being able to push code continuously all the time and lots and lots of production deploys per day. But that isn't necessarily the case for all organizations that need to make that number of changes. And in fact, it can almost begin to become a bit like a vanity metric. We talked to one organization and were sort of stunned to discover that the software delivery teams were being measured on how many microservices they created. And we were just kind of like, well, you might as effectively there just be, you're being measured on creating a mess. So I think, understanding where you are as an organization, what you're doing as an organization, and looking to improve that, it's not always about, being an elite performer, a Netflix or Google. Frankly, you are not Google.
But James, these are smart people. Our audience are smart people. The people doing the measuring know. Why are these metrics not really capturing what they should be capturing?
Well, I mean, I think one thing is just to have a framework for measurement in place anyway. It's the first of all, you want to have sufficient automation that you can collect those data points. I think that's one of the interesting things that Ron is talking about, in that they're a hosted platform. So historically, if you had a bunch of Jenkinsteins all over the place, how would you actually collect that data together? If you had people doing manual builds, how are you going to be able to get those sorts of insights and gather them and make them useful? I think as we move to hosted platforms, SaaS-based platforms, there's this huge opportunity to actually do better measurement. So I think it's a mix of, obviously you've got these standard reports, you've got the sort of report that CircleCI is putting together. But I mean, I think Sergey's got some opinions about this as well, about, perhaps your needs as an organization are about looking at those frameworks, thinking about what you want to improve, and then understanding perhaps what others are doing in the industry. But the key thing is to improve your own performance. You're not always going to benchmark against, some Silicon Valley startup paying all of its engineers $300,000-$400,000 a year with stock options. Because frankly, in the UK, at least, we don't always get that. So it's about being realistic. I think that's one of the important things. And so understanding, some of the things, what is the throughput of the job? How do we recover if something goes wrong? Those are genuinely useful metrics and becoming better as a software delivery organization.
Yes, Sergey, I'll bring you in here. Don't tell us, everything that you do to measure your productivity yet, but the measurement challenges that you have, are they similar to the sorts of things that Ron and James have pulled out here?
Yeah, definitely. As James pointed out, all those metrics states best of the best, and all the known companies with known names. And of course, we want to be better than them. And it's we have our own story related to measuring those types of metrics behind, which was related on analyzing all those kind of reports and studies. One of those which were came up from the Accelerate book written by Nicole Forsgren, Jess Humble, and Jen Kim, and which described the study behind 4 key metrics. And we actually got inspired by that and started to look into all those reports, and actually figured out that it's not enough to basically react on those. And with support of our own director of engineering, Haridin Hudson, who helped us create like an internal productivity team to tackle technical debt inside the company and basically make a software delivery improvements. We went even above those, just reviewing and thinking about how can we be in compared to those companies and those elite teams and so on. We decided that we actually need something that is would be more accurate to our current state of things in our company. And that lets us, even so you asked me not talk about that, but it lets us to creating another tool which was like specifically internally focused, which we called Dev KPIs, and which allowed us to track those 4 key metrics and software delivery KPIs. So we could actually experiment and reason about those metrics in a real time, adopt and improve on a regular basis.
Can I ask you something about that though? Is it important for you to measure against a peer group of other companies, or is it important to measure amongst yourselves and through time?
Yeah, we definitely, as I mentioned, we are looking at those numbers. We also have those those numbers defined as a baseline, so our developers could also look at those and kind of compare with the standards in the industry. But in the same time, we wanted to focus on, like specifically in our case, we wanted in the beginning to focus on the reducing lead time and the risk of getting changes into production. And also, like, we were thinking, how can we measure success? That's why it's also was important for us to actually have something which help us measuring those metrics on a daily basis and actually see the trends specific to our needs. And also, look at those more detailed numbers in some cases, plus involve other kind of third-party tooling we are using on our daily basis and track those as well.
All right. Well, we kept everyone in suspense long enough, haven't we? Ron, tell me about the metrics that you think are useful for measuring performance.
Thank you, and that was really helpful context, Sergey. The 4 metrics that we're talking about here are from the report that I created, the 2021 State of Software Delivery. Those are duration, the mean time to recovery, the throughput, and the success rate. And this is per workflow run. And so this is basically measuring from a commit, from an increment of code change, measuring the success of that code change through the application development pipeline. Now, this is somewhat similar to the metrics that are also reported in the bigger reports, the bigger industry reports, but they cover something that looks a little bit different. So very quickly, I'll go through and describe what it is that we can measure on our platform and how that's slightly different than what is recorded from these other reports, just so that it's clear what numbers we're talking about. So for duration, this is the exact length of time it takes for a workflow to run. That's it, just one workflow from pushing a commit to getting a signal returned. Mean time to recovery, this next one here, this is defined as the average time between failures and the next success. And so this is once I push code through my system, I get a signal back. If that signal is negative, how quickly can I respond to that signal and get a positive signal back? Now, throughput, this is the average number of workflows run per day. And so the average workflows run per day is going to, over the course of a week, will include the weekends. And so this does bias somewhat lower than what you would expect performance through the week. But this is per workflow. And so one of the things that's interesting about our data set is that I can't necessarily tell what your workflow does. And so this doesn't necessarily record the number of deploys that a company does, but it does record the number of increments of work pushed through their system. And so if you could assume that deploy is a fraction of the total amount of work that they do, imagining that and seeing that, on our platform, we see that the average, the folks in the 50th percentile push less than once per day. This is greatly different. And this would, it's assumed that this isn't always a workflow that does a deploy. The companies deploying hundreds or thousands of times a day just isn't a signal that we actually see on our platform. And we do see teams reach elite status for some of the metrics that the Accelerate and the DOOR report, some of those reports, that they capture what they consider elite stats for these metrics. And we're still able to show that teams can achieve those elite metrics on our platform, and they still don't have these types of deploy scenarios that are so widely reported, and so that motivate so many teams to reorganize their engineering teams to try and optimize towards those goals. We found that the most important metrics of these 4 is, in order, it's going to be duration. Success rate is the final one. Success rate is just the number of passing runs divided by the total number of runs. And so success rate from the larger reports, that's going to be identical. Mean time to recovery is identical. Duration looks a little bit different. This isn't exactly lead time, but it's close. And so it's also something that's really valuable to measure. And then mean time to recovery, I said, is identical. But duration of these four, I would say, is the most important. We're talking about continuous integration systems. This isn't just a matter of using a platform to host all your bash scripts so that you have an automation tool. Continuous integration is vastly more important than that and has far more capacity for impact on your organization than just hosting your automation scripts. And what I mean by that is the signal, right? Duration measures the length of time that it takes for code to work through your system. So this means that it's going to be well tested as it passes through your pipeline. Any of the signal that gets, or any time that you return a signal that is not positive, that gives your team the opportunity to now mitigate that problem and return your pipeline back to a green status or positive status. And so duration is the most important number to measure because it is the length of time that is required for your team to get signal. If this is 4 hours or 4 days, which unfortunately for some organizations, their workflow times can exceed lengths that look like that. That is an incredibly long time for your developers to wait for a signal that they may have to then mitigate, right? Not all signals are bad, but we want there to be the capacity to remediate any type of bad signal that comes through. And so the second most important one in this group here is mean time to recovery. And these two really define the feedback loop that is continuous integration. The length of time that it takes for you to get a signal, and then how quickly can I respond to that signal. Those are the things that, if optimized well, create the greatest capacity for your team to achieve the highest velocity measures. Throughput, this is going to be something that looks more like a baseline, right? Your team's throughput week over week is going to be interesting to your organization, but measuring throughput against teams that have completely different business interests and business goals isn't necessarily as valuable. It is valuable to know kind of where everyone else stands, but as Sergey pointed out, the real value in being able to take these metrics is to measure them as your baseline and then try to optimize from where you currently stand. And then success rate, I think, is also a super fun one because I consider this like a measure of how innovative your teams are. Because you should push bad code sometimes. Like if you have 90% success rate or even 100% success rate, like I'm not exactly sure how you're trying new things in an environment where you never have a failure. And so I think that like healthy pipelines actually have something that looks closer to 60% success rate for some of those things. But all four of these metrics are vastly important for engineering organizations to at least consider. I'm totally on board with what Sergey says about for an individual organization or company, drilling down into the way that your own organization can optimize from where you get from the start that these metrics provide for you, I think is really valuable. And it is also really valuable to keep an eye on what the behavior of everyone else, even if the ultimate goal isn't necessarily to beat them in any one of these metrics, except for possibly mean time to recovery. If there was any one of these that you would want to game, it would probably be that one.
James, can I bring you in here? Do Ron's tweaks make sense to you?
Yeah, I think so. Look, bottom line is that what we're doing, frankly, if there is a proxy for better software delivery, for modern software delivery, it is indeed CI/CD. So it's organizations that have, taken an approach where they've broken it down, they've thought of themselves, what do we need to automate around the builds? How do we automate testing? How do we make sure that developers are establishing better test coverage themselves? Let's get an understanding of which tests are truly valuable. Let's optimize around those. So I think the key for me is yeah, I think if we're going to improve, it's going to be what's best in modern software delivery. I mean, people talk about like microservices and all of that stuff. Frankly, let's get around to automated testing. Let's get around to CI/CD. And so if that's a key sort of input for getting better as a software delivery organization, then sure, let's measure that. And the sorts of metrics that Ron's laying out, I think makes sense. I mean, look, I think one beautiful thing the DORA report did lay out was, look, we can get away from the idea that moving fast means lower quality. So I think that's an absolutely key insight, and that's fantastic, huge service that Dora did for the industry. So it's like what you begin to understand is it's those behaviors that these organizations are doing means that they can indeed move faster, do more deploys and so on, have shorter lead times. However, having understood that, then let's think about our specific needs as an organization, how often we want to ship, and then optimize for the things that are most relevant to us, rather than thinking speed itself is the most essential thing.
Yeah, Sergey, tell me, how does this map to what you prioritize?
Yeah, definitely. I could agree here with James that what he mentioned also about the testability and deployability, it's definitely important aspects in creating like high performance. And this is also one of the main reasons why like adopting such techniques as test-driven development is important practice, because it forces developers to create more testable designs. And also, most importantly, all those studies show also that those metrics are highly correlated with positive outcomes that make sense to executives outside of product development. And there was also a strong statistical correlation between organizations which performed well on these key metrics and those who were more likely to perform better with regard to high-level business outcomes. And that's why also for us it's important to reflect on that on a daily basis and adopt on our needs, basically.
Yeah, well, there's no point in having amazing DevOps and a terrible products at the end of it, is there? That nobody wants.
For sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we have to talk about, Ron, is basically how people get better on this. And is the point of saying how we increase productivity? Well, just do better on your 4 metrics. Is that the argument?
I mean, in large part, I think that it is. It's also understanding what the 4 measurements mean for your organization. And I'll go back to, deploy should be a business decision. It shouldn't be a decision that hinges upon the operability of your engineering teams. You should be able to deploy when it is best for your organization, period. Whether that's a Friday evening, Saturday morning, Sunday evening, or 100 times a day. You should be using a platform that gives you the capacity to do these things whenever they're important to you. The success rate metric, I think, is also something that's interesting as far as like, we've experienced 2020 as a year of economic uncertainty. Watching these, the behavior on our platform over the course of the year. I mean, we could see in March and April that success rates went up. Throughput goes up, right? So when you see success rate go up and throughput go up at the same time, that's not building new features. That's probably filling bug tickets, shoring up business interest. I mean, like that really is responding to economic uncertainty. And so, like you do get very interesting signal out of something like success rate, even though I don't necessarily think that, success rate per branch is probably more interesting than success rate of workflows in general. But in large part, the 2 things that are really important here as far as like driving towards optimization is going to be the duration and the mean time to recovery. There's only so many things that you can do to get duration to get lower. I can make an arbitrarily fast workflow that has no tests and provides a very basic signal that it's not really valuable to anyone. And so driving duration down to 0 isn't really a business goal of anyone. Test coverage is the thing that is going to really like hold duration to something that looks like more than just a few minutes, because the more test coverage you have, the greater capacity you have to feel confident in the rest of your pipeline, right? We've been talking a lot about continuous integration right now, but the CD side of this is dependent on how well the CI side of this performs. And so, taking advantage of things like automating testing suites and making sure that you get global coverage of your test, whether it's through test-driven design or whether it's through going back and addressing technical debt, which I believe Sergey does a both of. I think most organizations are in a position where they're doing both of those things. And then there's third-party services. There's whether or not you're building images. There's some things that are going to create time blocks that your duration is never going to get lower than. And so understanding the way that your business and your software stack responds to your testing suite and to the goals of your software development pipeline is going to be really important in understanding what the lowest number that you could get there is going to be. Mean time to recovery, though, this, the way that you speed up mean time to recovery is through test coverage, right? The more exhaustive your testing is, and the more vocal your test responses or your errors are, the faster it is to remediate error. And this is the goal. This is the whole idea of creating software with these types of tools, is to create these types of feedback loops that give you the opportunity to move quickly, not fear breaking changes, right? Because we can push code that breaks and it doesn't make it into production with these tools. And so that gives us confidence to, lean into our innovative side, because we also know that we instrument our applications so well that when we do push code that does create an error, that it is something that we can resolve. So these things are how we do increase productivity. It's not just a matter of gaming these numbers or trying to drive these numbers to the most optimal values. It really is measuring baselines for your teams, understanding why you have the values that you do have for these metrics, and then understanding where your company has an opportunity to really achieve efficiency at scale as you do try to motivate your organization or your engineering teams to do better at these metrics.
Yeah, now just before I throw this one out, Ron, I noticed that you have provided numbers of what good looks like. Hello, there's some people doing well here.
That's right. These are, I think, this covers 44,000 organizations, like 50 million data points. These are values that are pulled from approximately the 50th percentile. So these are people who only are doing okay on CircleCI. And I won't say okay, because I think that the adoption of a continuous integration platform shows maturity of your engineering organization. And so we see the 50th percentile of workflows performance on our platform achieve these elite stats. And what that says is that the big step is to adopt continuous integration. Then it's choosing tooling that can help differentiate your organization from other incredibly fast organizations as well. And so what do we think that looks like? These, again, are pulled from approximately the 50th percentile in each one of these categories as measured. And we think that these are reasonable. Now, we don't think that this is a one-size-fits-all set of numbers for every organization in the world, but I think that it is incredibly important to know how far away from these you are, more than whether or not you're beating them. A duration of 4 days is certainly not the continuous integration scenario that I described earlier. It's not the feedback loop. It's not the waiting for signal. It's not the remediation of signal. But there may be some reasons why your business has a workflow that runs for 4 hours, and that might counter the wisdom that I've described here today. The mean time to recovery, I don't think that there's any reason why someone would want this to be greater than what we've written here. Less than an hour, I think, is what the 50th percentile is hitting on CircleCI. I think that you could reasonably expect this to be the metric that your teams could also hit. There are many, many teams who drive to significantly lower mean time to recovery than this. Now, there's a host of reasons why that might be the case. If the goal is to get signal as quickly as possible, and if you get bad signal, to remediate that signal as quickly as possible, then mean time to recovery is also going to be something that is going to be on the order of hours, hopefully. There could be other reasons why that's not the case for you. Throughput, again, this is a thing that is highly dependent on your business. I have no real interest in trying to tell someone how many times their application should be deployed. That makes no sense to me to even think of it in terms of that, because I think business decisions always should be the deciding factor for when your application gets delivered to your customer base. And then success rate. I put greater than 90% here, and I also said that success rates should be something lower than this. Your primary application and your default branch should not have red build. You should not be pushing bad code to them. Your code should be well tested on branches, and when you merge those branches, it should pass. Those types of scenarios are what keeps product in customers' hands. That keeps a positive experience for customers using your product, and those things are highly valuable. I definitely encourage teams to keep the primary branch of their application the success rate as high as possible. But I also think that the 50 to 60% is an incredibly realistic success rate on feature branches, development branches, bug branches, any of those types of things. That looks like innovation to me.
Sergey, how well are you doing against these benchmarks?
Oh yeah, we are doing pretty good, specifically in those last mentioned.
That's a relief.
Yeah, but it's also because we are striving to improve, and we also adopting on, as I mentioned, on a daily basis. And it's interesting that lots of organizations also look for like ways to measure developer productivity in a different ways. Like you can also think of like common anti-patterns is to look at lines of code, feature output, or to put too much focus on trying to spot some underperforming developers. But it's also what we found. It's important to create in the organization to provide an effective engineering environment so developers could be motivated to be more productive. And yeah, definitely we are trying to achieve this, and definitely we have some baselines and looking in those metrics, and that's definitely the way we go, and definitely something that we are working on. There is some areas which we still need to improve, but of course that's why we actually keep measuring those and also reflecting on those metrics and survey results and so on.
Now, in the last bit today, we're going to look at how we move to this future and how we set these goals to improve and how we measure better as well. James, do you want to start this one? And what are meaningful goals in 2021? Are meaningful goals in 2021 different to what they were in 2020 as well?
That's a good question. I mean, one of the things we've all had to get a lot better at e-commerce, right?
Yeah.
Look at the scaling that Zoom had to do. They weren't expecting to do that at the beginning of last year. In the US, curbside delivery, nobody knew that everybody was going to have that. But I mean, now even, local guy up the road, he launched a bar, I think, in February of last year. And so, he's like, what am I going to do? And he sort of had to build up, he gets on his bike and does e-commerce, basically. He delivers to the home. If you're around Hackney, Nobody Asked Me, they're called. He's a good lad, is Jamie. I think here's the thing. Look, there are a lot of changes that need to be made, and you don't just suddenly drop CI/CD on an organization and say now everything's going to be perfect. So you're going to be looking at, we don't know what's going to happen this year. We know that change is going to happen. We know we're going to have to get better at writing apps. Everyone is. It doesn't matter what field they're in. I mean, I mentioned curbside. The interesting thing there in the States, of course, is those retailers that had best bulked up to compete because of the pressure Amazon was putting on them were best enabled to build their own apps, had reshored, had developers close to the business, close to the customer, and were able to sort of iterate more quickly. Some of the things that we see in orgs that can iterate more quickly, they've broken things down into smaller pieces. And I mean that in terms of teams. So smaller teams, more granularity, less outsourcing, investing in your developer teams, understanding their psychology. I mean, I think there was an interesting question that Ron had made about sort of like trust and or safety. Like, people need to be able to take risks and know that things will be okay. So I think, You know, there are other disciplines. You're going to be better at sort of the DevOps side, improve your monitoring infrastructure, get some modern monitoring and observability tools in place so that when software breaks, which it will, we're all in effect testing in production at some point, you can remediate that. A blame-free culture, you know, blameless postmortems is something that sounds a bit wacky, but the idea that you can get together, work out what went wrong, and try and make it not happen again and write it down for yourselves and maybe others outside the organization. There is a set of interrelated disciplines. And what I would say is that you know, for most organizations, look, they're going to find it, perhaps you start with new apps. Perhaps you start with new development environments. You can't just go and grab your 15-year-old WebLogic app and expect to be doing the things with that you might on some new mobile apps you're building, or perhaps the Node and the JavaScript teams, folks building React are a bit more used to this test-driven development. So invest in them, support them, get better at that, and then think about bringing the rest along. But it's a complex sort of interweaving of different things that need to be done. I mean, I talk about progressive delivery because one of the things we've got, it used to be that testing infrastructure was expensive and scarce. So if you think about, like, you know, back in the massively olden days, and most people probably don't remember the things like Mercury Interactive, you were spending a huge amount of hardware resource just to have a testing infrastructure. These days, the idea that I can do that in the cloud with abundance, and I could do things like launch darkly, so have an application, frankly, running in production, but people couldn't see it. Think about feature flags. You can have more confidence in what you're doing, and with more confidence, you can start to improve all of these other things. So I guess for me, I've ended up making it sound more complicated. But break your teams down, support your software developers. Don't try and fit square pegs in round holes, and we'll hopefully get through 2021 you know, effective and taking advantage of these metrics to be even more effective at the end of the year.
Because that was what I was going to say, just to follow up on that one and finish it off. Yeah. When you are making all those changes, these metrics are still useful as ways to calibrate your progress?
Yeah, I think, I definitely think so, because you can always get better. And there are so many other things we can start to pull in. I mean, the fact that we've got developers using these like Git-based systems, you know, look at their behaviors in GitHub, begin to correlate, you know, it's not a question of like whose apps break, but more, you know, what's happening in the overall system, because it is you know, a system of people, software developers doing things. I mean, if you're using GitLab, again, start thinking about bringing all of this stuff together so that you can begin to get the metrics. The integration, and this is one of the things that I think CircleCI has historically done a decent job of, although maybe it's Ron's job to say that rather than me. You want to be tying into these other systems, and that's one of the opportunities with metrics. And of course, yeah, any metric you put out will be gained. But on the other hand, if you don't have any metrics, it's really hard to just improve. And the bottom line is we're all under pressure. We've all got to do better. And yeah, I think the metrics-driven approach for software delivery management really makes a lot of sense.
Now, Ron, I'm going to give you the chance to say the thing that James invited you to say in a moment. But I just want to go to Sergey before Ron finishes off for us. So, Sergey, how are you going to improve in 2021? What do you need to do to improve?
Yeah, I would say that it's definitely, we talk about all those metrics and reports and so on. It's definitely important to look at those. But what we found in our company that adoption of those advices from reports is quite challenging. And it's not always obvious to stakeholders or developers why these particular metrics are valuable. And it's a bit a stretch to ask like everyone to go and read all those reports and also read the Accelerate book, which is, in any case, I highly recommend to go through it and follow all the bits of advice which is coming from there in the study. And that could be also a good starting point, definitely. But also, I kind of, from the recommendation, I also could propose looking at your daily sprint basis stats and reason about those. I'm quite sure that already some companies have using some tools. Either it could be CircleCI Insights view or like Atlassian end of sprint reports, which could help grab some additional information for thoughts for next sprint retrospective conversation. And for us, we have managed to do some improvements in that field and also bring those dashboards into our monthly delivery review meetings, and which encourage teams to look and reflect on the data on a regular cadence. And this has definitely improved visibility in the organization.
And Ron, well, it's, yeah, you get the last word on this. Where do we go from? Where do we go from here? And can we, you know, should we be looking to measure more and to look more at the things that you can measure as ways of improving?
I mean, absolutely. Without setting, I mean, it's first measuring baseline, and then it's optimizing your team to get better at based on the goals of your business. I mean, and that's not ever going to change. And being able to benchmark with metrics that are widely used across the industry gives you the capacity to kind of do a temperature check as far as like your team compared to other teams. I don't think that there's any engineering organizations that would be one-to-one comparison, but these gut checks, the temperature check, I think is highly valuable. I mean, James, led a little bit into this. 2020 changed the world. There were a high number of organizations that have applications that run on a Mac Mini under an engineer's desk. That was all the load that they needed to supply. And so that was a plenty fine paradigm to work in until everyone got sent home and you weren't allowed to go back to your office. And now I need to move that Mac Mini into the cloud. And so there is a massive adoption of cloud native services that's happening, not just in 2020, but also in 2021 for the remainder of the folks that just didn't have a business interest in trying to motivate themselves into that space as quickly as they had to over the last year, or as they're currently continuing to do so now. And so being able to utilize platforms like CircleCI that can measure productivity from commit to deploy, that gives you the capacity to, in one place, kind of centralize the information. And I think that that's really highly valuable for a lot of teams to at least get started with understanding what the metrics are that are going to be most valuable to them, to start making API calls to pull down more data so that they can get more granular, so they can understand the things that are happening in their organizations even better. The 4 metrics are a great place to start and are a great way to kind of benchmark against the industry at large. But I think that, the real win that we're experiencing right now is seeing development on these platforms that do give you the capacity to create insight through data, so that you do have the capacity to really optimize your team to get better at the things that they do best already. And Sergey is absolutely right. None of these things are going to be globally applicable to any given team. It really is a matter of trying to find the way that these things fit into your organization in the best way. And while it is often a very difficult thing to try to add new metrics to an engineering team that already deals with things like crunch and workloads that are called sprint, the one additional thing that is really great about continuous integration that Sergey didn't mention is that it is also incredibly highly correlated with quality of life improvements for your engineering teams. And I think that is in large part due to what you were talking about earlier, Tim, the philosophy of blameless postmortem, the philosophy of not having risk aversion because you have trust in your system, trust in your tools, trust in the other engineers on your team. Those are all things that also come out of this. And ultimately, and I think James said this, ultimately software is developed by people and it's consumed by people as well. And so while much of these metrics are, measuring these things in this fine-tuned kind of numerical kind of way, there's also the human aspect of it that is incredibly important that we didn't cover a tremendous amount in today's presentation. But, making sure we don't burn our engineers out. Like you can get throughput to go through the roof by extending hours, right? Like that's not anyone's goal. And we did in 2021. I mentioned earlier that we saw throughput and success rate go up very high in March and April. And some of that came from signal that we saw over the weekends, right? This is clearly people that are working over the weekend and outside of their normal business hours. Lowest success rates and throughputs were right after that.
Yeah.
And that's in a very predictable way. And so hopefully what 2021 brings us is a return to that human side of measurement, as well as the measurement of efficiency of our tools.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, well said. It's we can measure all sorts, but one thing that we cannot avoid measuring is quality of life, and that's quality of life for the people that are watching this as well. We hope that we haven't burnt you out in the last 45, 50 minutes. Because there's thanks. I mean, thanks very much to all three of you. This has been it's been really interesting. It's been thought-provoking. It's been useful as well. It's practical as well. If you've been watching this and you thought there's something interesting, I'd like to get into that a little bit more. Well, here's a couple of links for it. Specifically what Sergey's team's been doing at Contentful, and of course the report, Ron's report as well. Have a read of it, and if there's any questions arising from it, let us know about it. Get in touch with us, and if you'd like to see some more of this on our Regcast, I think it would be a good thing to do in 2021, and let us know, because if you ask for it, then we'll do it. That's what we do at the Reg. However, we are now out of time for today, so I just want to say thank you very much to Ron, to James, to Sergey. Thank you, guys. Wave to you. Yep. It's been terrific. Thanks for your commitment. Thanks for putting this together, and for talking about it so openly. Thanks to all of you who've watched this. We'll see you again for a Regcast very soon. Meanwhile, stay safe and don't work too many weekends. So from me, Tim Phillips, and everyone at the Reg, goodbye.
Good advice.